The bullet that killed William McCarthy's wife came through their cabin window on a Tuesday morning in October 1873. Meant for him, but finding Sarah's heart instead as she poured his coffee. He was 24 years old, and in the space between one breath and the next, his entire world collapsed into ash and fury. The outlaw who fired that shot was dead within the week, but it brought Sarah back to him exactly never, and William learned that some kinds of justice taste like nothing at all. 3 years later, he rode into San Jose, California with nothing but a weary horse, a worn saddle, and a heart he'd locked away so tight he'd forgotten where he'd buried the key. The town sprawled beneath the spring sunshine, alive with the sounds of commerce and construction, of people building futures he no longer believed in. He drifted through a dozen towns since Sarah's death, working odd jobs, moving on before anyone could ask questions or expect conversation. San Jose would be no different, he told himself. A month, maybe 2, earn enough to keep moving, keep the memories at bay. The livery stable owner, a grizzled man named Pete with kind eyes, hired him on the spot. "You know horses, I can tell," Pete said, watching how William's hands moved over his mare's flanks, checking her shoes, speaking to her in low tones. "Had them all my life," William admitted. "My father raised them in Missouri, taught me everything before the war took him." Pete nodded, asking nothing more, and William was grateful for it. The work was good, honest, exhausting enough that he could sleep at night without dreaming too much. He rented a small room above the general store, kept to himself, spoke only when necessary. The townspeople learned quickly that William McCarthy wasn't interested in their church socials or their friendly invitations. He was polite, distant, a ghost in their midst. 4 weeks into his stay, Pete mentioned needing supplies from the Fletcher ranch, about 5 miles north of town. "Widow Fletcher runs it now," Pete explained. "Her husband died couple years back. She breeds some of the finest horses in the county, supplies half the ranches around here. Could you ride out, check on that order I placed? She's expecting someone." William agreed because it was his job, nothing more. He set out early the next morning, following the road that wound through golden hills dotted with oak trees. The Fletcher Ranch announced itself with well-maintained fences and pastures where horses grazed in the morning light, their coats gleaming. The main house was modest but solid, painted white with green shutters, surrounded by a garden that someone clearly tended with care. He was examining a magnificent bay stallion in the nearest corral when he heard her voice behind him. "He's not for sale, if that's what you're thinking." William turned and found himself looking at a woman perhaps a year or 2 younger than himself, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, green eyes that held wariness and strength in equal measure, and dirt on her hands from morning work. She wore men's trousers under her skirts, boots that had seen hard use, and carried herself with the careful independence of someone who'd learned not to rely on anyone. "I'm here from Pete's livery," he said, removing his hat. "About the order you placed." Her expression softened slightly. "You must be the new man he mentioned. I'm Fiona Fletcher. The tack you're picking up is in the barn. I'll show you." They walked together across the yard, and William found himself noticing details he'd trained himself to ignore in women. The capable way she moved, the calluses on her hands, the strand of hair that had escaped her braid and caught the sunlight. He forced his attention elsewhere, to the horses, the buildings, anything safe. The barn was immaculate, organized with military precision. Fiona gestured to several pieces of tack hanging near the door. "These 3 saddles and the bridles. Pete knows the price. I've got 2 more saddles due next month if his customers were satisfied with the last batch. You make them yourself?" The question escaped before he could stop it. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the kind of work that took years to master. "My husband taught me," she said, and something in her voice made William glance at her face. He recognized the tone, the careful flatness that came from speaking around grief. "James was a master saddle maker. When he died, I kept the business going. Turns out I have a talent for it." William nodded, understanding more than she'd said. He loaded the tack onto the pack horse Pete had provided, working in silence while Fiona watched. When he finished, she surprised him by asking, "You know horses well. I saw how you were looking at Copernicus in the corral. Most people just see a pretty animal. You were evaluating his conformation, his temperament." "Grew up with them," William said shortly, not wanting to encourage conversation, not wanting to feel the small pull of interest her observation had created. "I'm looking for someone who can help me break a 3-year-old filly I've been training. She's smart but spirited, needs someone with patience and skill. Pete's too old for that kind of work now, and most of the ranch hands around here are too rough. If you're interested in extra work, the pay is good." William should have said no. Should have ridden back to town, kept his distance, maintained the walls he'd built. But something in her directness, in the way she looked at him as though she understood about walls, made him hesitate. And he'd always had a weakness for difficult horses. "I could take a look at her." Fiona led him to a smaller corral where a young chestnut filly with a white blaze paced the fence line, full of nervous energy. William spent 20 minutes just watching her, noting how she moved, how she responded to Fiona's presence, where her attention went. Finally, he climbed the fence and entered the corral, moving slowly, letting the filly get used to him. It took another 10 minutes before she allowed him close enough to touch her neck, and 5 more before she accepted his hands on her face, her withers. When he climbed back out, Fiona was studying him with open curiosity. "She doesn't trust easily. Most men she runs from. She's been hurt," William said. "Someone hit her, probably tried to break her rough. It'll take time to teach her that hands don't always mean pain." "That's why I need someone like you," Fiona said. "Can you come 3 times a week? Early mornings before the heat sets in?" He should have said no. Instead, he found himself agreeing, and 3 days later he was back at the Fletcher ranch as the sun painted the hills gold and pink. Fiona had coffee ready, strong and black, and they drank it in companionable silence before he started work with the filly. The horse was challenging, testing him constantly, but William had patience born from his own brokenness. He understood fear, understood the need to protect yourself from more hurt. He worked slowly, speaking to her in low tones, never forcing, always giving her the choice to come to him. Fiona watched from the fence, occasionally asking questions, and William found himself explaining his methods, his philosophy of working with horses. "My father used to say that breaking a horse was the wrong idea," he told her during the 2nd week, while the filly investigated his pockets for the apple pieces he'd started bringing. "He said you don't break them. You invite them into partnership. You show them that working with you is better than working against you." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," Fiona said. "He was. Died at Shiloh when I was 16. I'm sorry." The words were simple, but her tone made them genuine. The war took too many good people. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. William arrived before dawn, worked with the filly, sometimes helped Fiona with other horses or repairs around the ranch. She never pried into his past, never pushed for conversation he didn't offer, but gradually, in small moments, they began to talk. She told him about James, about meeting him when she was barely 18, about 3 brief years of happiness before a riding accident took him from her. He was trying to help a neighbor round up cattle in the hills. His horse stepped in a hole, went down wrong. James broke his neck. He died before they could even get him to town. How old were you? William asked quietly. 21. 3 years ago this past February. She was silent for a moment, then added, people kept telling me I was young, that I'd marry again. As if James was something I could just replace. I decided I'd rather be alone than pretend my heart wasn't buried with him. William understood that sentiment more than he could say. He found himself telling her about Sarah, about the bullet, about the hollow rage that had consumed him afterward. I tracked down the man who fired that shot, found him in a mining camp in Nevada, drinking away whatever conscience he had left. I stood there with my gun, ready to kill him, and all I could think was that it wouldn't matter. Sarah would still be gone, so I told the sheriff instead, watched them hang him, and felt exactly nothing. What did you feel? Fiona asked. Empty. Like someone had carved out everything inside me and left just the shell walking around. She nodded slowly. I know that feeling. Like you're watching your own life from somewhere far away and you can't quite remember why you're supposed to care about any of it. They stood together at the corral fence, watching the filly graze peacefully now, comfortable with their presence. The sun was climbing higher, warming the air, and William realized he'd been at the ranch for nearly 3 hours, longer than he needed to be. He should leave, should maintain the distance that kept him safe. But Fiona was easy to be with, understanding his silences as well as his words, and he found himself reluctant to mount his horse and ride away. Stay for breakfast, Fiona said, as though reading his thoughts. It's the least I can do since I'm keeping you here so early. He should have declined. Instead, he followed her to the house, into a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. They ate together at a scrubbed pine table, and Fiona talked about her plans for expanding her breeding program, about the bloodlines she wanted to develop. William found himself drawn into the conversation, offering opinions, asking questions, feeling something stir inside him that might have been interest, might have been the faintest echo of hope. The pattern continued through spring and into summer. William worked at the livery during the day, rode out to the Fletcher ranch 3 mornings a week, sometimes 4. The filly progressed beautifully, accepting first a saddle, then his weight on her back, then finally full riding. Fiona was delighted with the results, insisted on paying him more than they'd agreed, and immediately asked if he'd work with 2 more young horses she'd been saving for the right trainer. You have a gift for this, she told him one morning in late June, watching him ride the filly through her paces. Have you ever thought about training professionally? I used to, William admitted, dismounting, giving the filly the apple she'd learned to expect. Sarah and I were planning to start our own stable. She loved horses as much as I did. After she died, I couldn't stand the idea anymore. Felt like I'd be building our dream without her, and that seemed like betrayal somehow. Fiona was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, I felt that way about the saddle making at first. Like continuing what James taught me meant I was moving on without him, forgetting him. Then I realized that keeping his craft alive was a way of honoring him, of making sure something of him continued in the world. The work doesn't betray their memory. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us connected to who we were when they loved us. Her words settled into William's chest, finding cracks in the armor he'd built. He looked at her standing there in the morning light, this woman who understood loss in ways most people never would, who'd chosen to survive by building something with her grief instead of running from it. She was beautiful, he realized suddenly, not just in her features but in her strength, her resilience, the way she'd refused to let tragedy destroy her. The realization terrified him. He started finding excuses to avoid the ranch. told Pete he needed extra hours at the livery, claimed he was too tired for morning training sessions, sent messages to Fiona about delays and complications. She didn't push, didn't demand explanations, which somehow made it worse. After 2 weeks of his absence, she appeared at the livery stable one afternoon, leading one of the young horses he'd been training. "William," she said quietly, and there was no accusation in her voice, only understanding. "We need to talk." Pete, with the wisdom of age, suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. William stood in the barn aisle, trapped between wanting to run and wanting to stay, his heart hammering against his ribs. Fiona tied the horse, then turned to face him. "I'm frightening you," she said. It wasn't a question. "We're frightening you, this thing that's growing between us." "There's nothing growing," William said, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. "Don't lie to me. I've spent 3 years learning to recognize truth from politeness, substance from shadows. You feel it same as I do, you're just terrified of it." "I can't," William said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Fiona, I can't. I loved Sarah more than breathing, and I failed her. I couldn't protect her, couldn't save her. She died because of me, because someone wanted me dead and she was standing too close. How am I supposed to risk that again? How am I supposed to care about someone else when I know what it costs?" Fiona stepped closer, her eyes bright with emotion. "You didn't fail Sarah. A murderer failed her. Evil failed her. You loved her, and that love was real and good, and nothing can take that away. But William, she's gone. We're both gone in different ways, you and I. We buried our hearts with them, and we've been walking around like ghosts ever since, pretending that's the same as living." "Maybe I don't deserve to live any other way," William said. "And maybe I don't either," Fiona countered. "Maybe we both deserve to stay locked in our grief forever, faithful to people who'd be heartbroken to see what we've become. Or maybe we deserve a chance to feel something again, even if it terrifies us, even if it means betraying our vows to stay broken." "I'm afraid," William admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep. "I'm afraid that if I love you, I'll lose you too. I can't survive that again, Fiona. It would destroy what little of me is left." "I'm afraid too," she said softly. "Every single day. I'm afraid that my heart forgot how to open. I'm afraid that I'm too damaged, too independent, too used to being alone. I'm afraid that I'll disappoint you, that I'll never be what you need. But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." She reached out slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and took his hand. Her palm was warm, calloused, real. William looked down at their joined hands and felt something break inside him, some wall he'd built so carefully crumbling under the weight of 3 years' loneliness and grief. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to love someone again without dishonoring Sarah's memory." "Sarah loved you, didn't she?" Fiona asked gently. "More than anything. Then she'd want you to be happy. She'd want you to live, really live, not just exist. Loving again doesn't erase what you had with her. It means her love changed you enough that you're still capable of opening your heart, even after everything." William pulled Fiona into his arms then, holding her tight, feeling her arms come around him with equal strength. They stood together in the barn, 2 broken people clinging to each other, and for the first time since Sarah's death, William allowed himself to feel something besides grief. It was terrifying and painful and wonderful all at once, like blood returning to a limb that had gone numb, pins and needles spreading through his chest. "I care about you," he said into her hair. "God help me, I care about you so much it keeps me awake at night. I don't want to. I've tried not to. But you're under my skin, Fiona Fletcher, and I don't know what to do about it. Care about me more," she said. "Stop fighting it. Stop running. Just stay and let's see what happens when 2 people who never expected to love again try anyway." They started slowly, carefully, two wounded creatures learning trust. William began spending more time at the ranch, not just for training but for conversation, for shared meals, for the simple pleasure of her company. Fiona showed him her account books, her breeding plans, asked his opinion on business decisions. He found himself invested in her success, in her dreams, in ways he hadn't been invested in anything for years. They talked about Sarah and James, about memories and loss, refusing to pretend their first loves hadn't existed. William told stories about Sarah's terrible cooking and worse singing, about how she'd insisted on learning to shoot and proved to be a better marksman than him. Fiona shared memories of James teaching her leatherwork, of his patience and kindness, of dreams they'd had that would never come true. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it transformed in the sharing, becoming something they carried together instead of separately. In July, during a hot afternoon when work was slow at the livery, William rode out to the ranch to find Fiona struggling to repair a section of fence in the south pasture. He dismounted without a word and joined her, and they worked side by side in comfortable silence until the fence was solid again. When they finished, Fiona produced a canteen of cool water and they sat in the shade of an oak tree, shoulders touching, watching her horses graze. "I've been thinking," Fiona said carefully, "about what comes next, for the ranch, for me. I've been running this place alone for 3 years, proving I could do it, proving I didn't need anyone, and I don't need anyone not to survive. But William, I'd like someone anyway. I'd like you here, not just for work but as a partner, in the business, in my life, in everything." William's heart raced. "Fiona, are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm saying I love you," she said, turning to look at him directly. "I didn't think I could love anyone after James. I was certain my heart died with him. But somehow you slipped past all my defenses and now here we are. I love you, and I want a future with you if you want that too." "I love you," William said, and the words felt like a confession and an absolution all at once. "I love you and it terrifies me, but I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of running from the only good thing that's happened to me since Sarah died. Yes, I want a future with you. Yes, I want to be your partner. Yes to all of it." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and William felt his heart beginning to wake from its long sleep. They sat together under that oak tree as the afternoon faded into evening, making plans, building dreams, two people who'd thought they were finished with happiness discovering they'd been wrong. They married in September, a simple ceremony at the ranch with Pete and a few close friends as witnesses. William wore his only good suit, Fiona a dress of pale blue that brought out her eyes, and when they exchanged vows, they both cried, remembering the people they'd loved before while embracing the love they'd found now. The minister, an elderly man who'd known loss himself, blessed them with words about second chances and the resilience of the human heart. William moved into the ranch house, into the life Fiona had built from grief and determination. They combined their skills and knowledge, transforming the operation into something larger than either could have managed alone. William's talent for training and Fiona's breeding program proved to be a perfect match, and within months, they had more business than they could handle. Ranchers came from 3 counties over seeking their horses and tack, praising the quality and care evident in every animal. But it was the small moments William treasured most. Morning coffee on the porch, watching sunrise paint the hills gold. Working side by side in the barn, their movements synchronized without words. Fiona falling asleep against his shoulder in the evenings, trusting him to hold her safe. The way she laughed, full and free, when one of the horses did something particularly clever or ridiculous. The passion they discovered in each other, Two people who'd thought that part of themselves dead, learning pleasure and intimacy again. They had their difficult days too. Times when grief would rise up unexpected and overwhelming, when William would wake from nightmares of Sarah's death, when Fiona would cry for James on the anniversary of his accident. They learned to hold each other through those storms, understanding that loving again didn't mean forgetting, that their hearts were large enough to honor the past while building the future. In their second spring together, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy and terror in equal measure. She was 25 now, William 28, and both of them remembered too well how quickly happiness could be stolen away. They didn't speak of their fears, but William became almost obsessively protective, and Fiona had to remind him repeatedly that she was not fragile, that pregnancy was not illness. "I'm scared too," she told him one evening, taking his hand and placing it on her swelling belly. "I'm terrified something will go wrong, that we'll lose this baby, that we're tempting fate by daring to be this happy. But William, we can't live our lives afraid of loss. We've already lost so much. If we let fear stop us from embracing this joy, then grief wins. We can't let grief win anymore." The baby came in late October, after 18 hours of labor that aged William a decade. But when the midwife placed their son in his arms, red-faced and squalling and perfect, William felt something complete inside him, some circle finally closing. They named him Thomas, after William's father, and he had his mother's green eyes and a set of lungs that could wake the entire county. Fiona proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but practical, refusing to coddle or fuss unnecessarily. William was more nervous, constantly checking that Thomas was breathing, that he was warm enough, that he was content. Fiona teased him gently about it, but she understood. They'd both learned that life was fragile, that the things you loved could be taken in an instant. It made them grateful for every ordinary moment, every quiet night, every toothless baby smile. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch flourished. William and Fiona hired 2 young men to help with the daily work, freeing them to focus on training and breeding and raising their son. Thomas learned to walk holding onto corral fences, spoke his first words to the horses, and showed signs of inheriting both parents' affinity for animals. On a warm evening in May, when Thomas was nearly 2 years old, William and Fiona sat together on their porch, watching their son play in the yard with a patient old dog they'd acquired. The setting sun painted everything golden, and William felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening in its intensity. "You ever feel guilty?" he asked quietly. "For being this happy?" Fiona was silent for a moment, considering. "Sometimes. Then I remember that Sarah and James loved us enough to want this for us. They'd be glad we found each other, glad we didn't waste our lives grieving. We honor them by living well, by loving well, by building something good from the ashes they left behind." "I used to think my life ended that day Sarah died," William said. "I thought the best of me was buried with her, that everything after was just marking time until I could be with her again. I was so wrong. She gave me 3 years of joy, and they were precious." "But you've given me a lifetime, Fiona. You've given me a reason to wake up each morning, a home, a family, a purpose. You've given me back my life." "You've given me the same," Fiona said, leaning into him. "I was so lonely before you came, William. So determined to be strong, to need no one, to prove I could survive anything. But survival isn't the same as living. You taught me that. You taught me that opening my heart again wasn't weakness or betrayal. It was the bravest thing I could do." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged, while Thomas's laughter rang across the yard and horses nickered softly in the barn. Two people who'd lost everything had found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful from the ruins. They'd loved and lost and loved again. And in doing so, they discovered that the human heart has a capacity for resilience that matches its capacity for grief. 2 years later, Fiona gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had her father's dark hair and a temperament as spirited as the horses her parents raised. Thomas proved to be a devoted older brother, gentle and protective, already showing signs of his father's patience and his mother's determination. The ranch continued to grow, their reputation spreading throughout California and beyond. William sometimes visited Sarah's grave, a simple stone in the San Jose cemetery where he'd arranged to have her body moved from Missouri. He brought flowers and told her about his life, about Fiona and the children, about the happiness he'd found when he'd stopped looking for it. He never felt guilty there, never felt he'd betrayed her. Instead, he felt grateful that she'd loved him enough to shape him into a man capable of loving again, even after unimaginable loss. Fiona did the same with James's memory, keeping a photograph of him in her workshop, sometimes speaking to it while she worked on a particularly challenging piece of tack. She told her children about him, about his kindness and skill, making sure they knew that their family's story included people who'd loved before, who'd left legacies of love that continued even after death. As years passed, Thomas and Rose grew strong and capable, learning the family business, inheriting their parents' gift with horses. The ranch became one of the most respected operations in the state, known for quality animals and the integrity of the people who raised them. William and Fiona trained dozens of horses together, sold breeding stock across the West, and built a life that honored both their past and their present. On their 10th wedding anniversary, William surprised Fiona with a gift he'd been crafting in secret for months. It was a leather-bound journal hand-tooled with images of horses and oak trees, filled with blank pages. On the first page, he'd written in careful script, "For all the stories still to come." Fiona cried when she opened it, understanding the meaning behind the gift. They'd spent so long looking backward, honoring what they'd lost. Now William was declaring faith in the future, in years still unlived, in stories still unwritten. They had more life to live together, more joy to find, more dreams to build. "Thank you," she whispered, holding the journal close. "For believing we deserve more stories, for believing I deserve them with you." "Thank you for saving me," William said. "I was drowning in grief when I rode into San Jose, convinced the best part of my life was over. You showed me I was wrong. You gave me reasons to live again, to hope again, to love again. Everything good in my life now exists because you had the courage to reach for me when I'd given up." They kissed then, a kiss that held 10 years of shared history, of challenges overcome and happiness earned. Thomas and Rose, now 10 and 8 years old, made exaggerated sounds of disgust from the doorway before dissolving into giggles. William and Fiona laughed too, pulling their children into an embrace that encompassed all of them, this family built from loss and love, from second chances and stubborn hope. The ranch continued to thrive as the children grew. Thomas inherited his father's gift for training difficult horses, while Rose showed her mother's talent for breeding and business. They worked together as a family, building on the foundation William and Fiona had laid, expanding into new ventures while maintaining the quality and care that had always defined their operation. When Thomas was 18, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a practical young woman named Elizabeth who shared his passion for horses. William watched his son court her and saw echoes of his own youth, of the first love he'd found with Sarah. At the wedding, Standing beside Fiona as they watched Thomas and Elizabeth exchange vows, William felt the full circle of his life. He'd loved and lost and loved again, and now his son was beginning his own journey, carrying forward the lessons of both love and resilience. Rose, at 16, announced she had no interest in marriage yet, that she intended to expand the ranch's operations into training horses for the cavalry. "The army needs good mounts," she argued, showing her parents detailed plans and calculations. "We could triple our income and our reputation." William and Fiona exchanged glances, recognizing their own ambition and determination in their daughter, and gave her their blessing to pursue the idea. The venture proved enormously successful. Within 2 years, the Fletcher-McCarthy Ranch, as it was now known, had contracts with 3 Army forts and a waiting list of private buyers. They employed a dozen workers, trained over 50 horses a year, and had become one of the most prosperous operations in Northern California. But prosperity wasn't what William measured his life by anymore. On quiet evenings when work was done and the family gathered for dinner, he counted his blessings in different currency. Fiona's hand in his, her smile across the table, the way she still made his heart race after all these years. Thomas's laughter, Rose's fierce intelligence, the grandchildren that would someday carry their legacy forward. The horses grazing peacefully in pastures he'd helped build. The home he'd created with a woman who'd understood his grief because she'd carried her own, who'd been brave enough to love again when both of them had sworn they never would. Sarah would always be his first love, the girl who'd shaped his young heart and taught him what it meant to cherish someone. Her loss had broken him in ways that never fully healed, leaving scars he carried still. But Fiona had shown him that broken things could still be beautiful, that hearts could mend enough to love again, differently but no less deeply. And James would always be part of their story too, the man who'd taught Fiona her craft, who'd loved her well in the brief time they'd had. His legacy lived in every saddle she made, in the skills she'd passed to their children, in the strength she'd developed surviving his loss. Together, William and Fiona had built something neither could have imagined in their darkest days of grief. They'd honored their first loves by refusing to let tragedy make them bitter, by choosing to risk their hearts again despite knowing the potential cost. They'd created a family, a business, a life rich with meaning and connection. On a summer evening when William was 53 and Fiona 50, they walked together through their land as the sun set behind the hills. Their children were grown now, Thomas married with 2 children of his own, Rose engaged to a cavalry officer she'd met through business dealings. The ranch hummed with activity even at day's end, a testament to decades of hard work and careful planning. "You remember the day we met?" Fiona asked, her hand warm in William's. "You were examining Copernicus, and I was so suspicious of this stranger on my property." "I remember thinking you were the most self-sufficient person I'd ever met," William said. "Also the most guarded. I recognized that because I was the same way. 2 people so determined never to be hurt again that we'd built walls high enough to keep out everything, including happiness. Thank God we were both too stubborn to maintain those walls," Fiona said with a smile. "Thank God you agreed to train that filly and kept coming back, and eventually let me close enough to see past your defenses. Thank God you showed up at the livery that day and refused to let me run," William countered. "You were braver than me, Fiona. I would have kept running forever if you hadn't stopped me, hadn't made me face what I was feeling." "We saved each other," Fiona said simply. "We both lost people we loved desperately, and we both thought that was the end of our stories. But it turned out we were wrong. The middle chapters were just beginning, and they've been more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." They stood together watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Horses grazed peacefully nearby, their coats gleaming in the fading light. From the main house, they could hear Thomas and his family laughing together over dinner. Rose was in the barn, probably working on some new training technique or business plan, unable to stop even as day ended. This was the life they'd built from ashes and grief, from second chances and stubborn hope. William pulled Fiona close, kissing her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and lavender that always clung to her. She leaned into him, solid and real, the woman who'd taught him that loving again wasn't betrayal but the highest honor he could pay to those he'd lost. "I love you," he said, words he never tired of speaking. "I loved Sarah with all the passion of youth, and that love changed me forever. But I love you with the depth that comes from understanding loss, from knowing how precious and fragile happiness is. I love you with gratitude for every day we have together, because I know too well how quickly those days can end." "I love you the same way," Fiona said. "James was my first love, my young love, and he'll always be part of me. But you're my forever love, William. You're the one I chose when I'd sworn never to choose again. You're the one who showed me that hearts are resilient enough to break and mend and break and mend, and that each mending makes them stronger, not weaker." They walked back to the house hand in hand, past the barn where they'd first admitted their feelings, past the corral where William had worked with that spirited filly so many years ago, past the oak tree where they'd sat and planned their future. Every corner of this ranch held memories now, layers of years built one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. Inside the house, their family waited. Thomas's children ran to greet them, chattering about the new foal in the barn and asking permission to name it. Rose emerged from the kitchen with news about a new army contract. Elizabeth herded everyone toward the dinner table, managing chaos with the same practical competence that had made her such a good match for Thomas. The dining room filled with noise and life and love, this family they'd created against all odds. William looked around the table at the faces gathered there and felt his heart full to bursting. He thought his capacity for joy had died with Sarah on that October morning so long ago. He'd been certain that his life after her death would be nothing but gray existence, marking time until he could join her. How wrong he'd been! How grateful he was to have been wrong! After dinner, after their family had departed for their own homes, William and Fiona sat together on the porch in the comfortable silence of long companionship. Stars emerged overhead, bright and clear in the California sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and the horses answered with soft whinnies. "We've had a good life," Fiona said contentedly. "Against all expectations, despite all the grief and loss we've carried, we've built something good and true and lasting." "The best life," William agreed. "Not the one I planned, not the one I expected, but somehow better because it came when I'd stopped looking for it, when I thought I was finished with happiness." "Our children will carry on after us," Fiona observed. "They'll keep the ranch going, keep breeding and training horses, keep the legacy alive. Everything we've built will continue growing and changing with each generation." "That's more than most people get," William said. "A life well lived, children who thrive, work that matters, and love that endures. We've been blessed beyond measure, you and I." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who'd lost everything and found each other in the wreckage. They'd loved young and lost young, had given up on happiness, had resigned themselves to lonely futures. But life had other plans. Life brought them together in a California town, gave them second chances they never expected, taught them that the human heart was resilient enough to love again even after being shattered. William McCarthy had thought his story ended the day Sarah died. He'd been wrong. That was just the end of one chapter, the closing of one beautiful but brief story. The next chapter began the day he rode into San Jose, though he didn't know it at the time. It began when a guarded widow asked him to train a difficult filly, when he agreed against his better judgment, when he slowly let down the walls he'd built and allowed himself to feel again. Fiona Fletcher had thought her heart died with James in the California hills. She'd been wrong too. Her heart had simply gone dormant, waiting for someone patient enough to reach it, someone damaged enough to understand it, someone brave enough to risk it alongside his own broken heart. Together, they discovered that second loves were different from first loves, but no less real, no less precious. They'd learned that grief could coexist with joy, that honoring the past didn't mean sacrificing the future, that the scars from loss could become sources of strength rather than shame. Their story wasn't the one either had planned or expected. It was better. It was real. It was proof that giving up on love was premature as long as breath remained, that hope could return even after years of darkness, that two broken people could create something whole together. As stars wheeled overhead and the ranch settled into nighttime quiet, William and Fiona remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful for every unexpected blessing their second chance had brought. They'd loved and lost and loved again, and in the loving again, they'd discovered that life's greatest gift wasn't avoiding pain, but having the courage to risk it in pursuit of connection, meaning, and joy. Their children would remember them as partners in every sense, two strong people who'd built a legacy together. Their grandchildren would hear stories of resilience and second chances, of hearts brave enough to try again. And the horses they'd bred and trained would carry their bloodlines and their philosophy forward for generations, living testaments to patience, trust, and the transformative power of gentle persistence. This was their happily ever after, earned through grief and courage, built on foundations of loss and hope, sustained by love that refused to surrender to fear. William and Fiona Fletcher McCarthy had found each other when both had given up, and in finding each other, they'd rediscovered themselves and built a life more beautiful than either could have imagined in their darkest hours. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy secure, and their love eternal.